To the members of the Black History Committee, along with the faculty, staff, and scholars at the International Leadership of Texas, Keller campus, thank you for inviting me here today as a featured speaker to weigh in on this year's Black History Program theme, Continuing the Legacy of Black Excellence. My name is Thurman Jones, publisher of the North Dallas Gazette. We are a 31-year-old publication based in Dallas, Texas. I am deeply humbled to be of service. But not only is it about finding excellence personally, but about how one person's pursuit of excellence can live on and continue long after you have passed from this earth. Undoubtedly, by now, you have most likely at least heard the name George Washington Carver. But you may not know the whole story of his life, and most people are not aware of how his inspirations has changed the whole world following his death. He was born sometime in the 1860s. No one is for sure of the exact date. Born into slavery, he was the son of Mary Washington and her husband Giles. His father would unfortunately pass away before he was even born. When George was but an infant, he and his mother were kidnapped from the farm of Moses Carver by night raiders. Moses put out word that he was looking for a chance to bargain for the pair's return. George's mother was never found and presumably killed. But Moses Carver managed to arrange a meeting at the crossroads with the raiders, trading his last horse for the return of the infant George Washington, after which Moses Carver raised the young black child as his own. George Washington Carver was obviously a bright young child, and the Carvers encouraged his learning, with his aunt teaching him to read and write. There was no schools where blacks were allowed to attend in Diamond Grove, Missouri. So eventually George would travel to Neosho, Missouri, where there was a school he could attend. By the way, there is a school in Neosho named after him to this day. While in Neosho, he befriended a woman by the name of Mariah Watkins, whose words would remain with him throughout the rest of his life. I quote, "You must learn all you can and then go back into the world and give your learning back to the people," end quote from Miss Mariah Watkins. George spent several years attending many different schools, even homesteaded some property and cultivated 17 acres of various crops. Then in 1891, he became the first black student at Iowa State, where his bachelor's thesis was titled, I quote, "Plants are modified by men," end quote. He received a Master's of Science degree in 1896 and was the first black faculty member at the college. From there, at the request of another notable black figure, Booker T. Washington, George would go to the Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, to head up its agricultural department. He would ultimately serve for 47 years at the school. At this point, we should dispel a popular myth. George Washington Carver did not invent peanut butter. He was a few centuries late to that game, with the ancient Incas being credited as the first to grind peanuts into a paste. What he did do was develop 266 products from the peanut, many of which are still in use today. He also developed 88 products from the sweet potato. He established crop rotation practices that allowed farmers to cultivate much more productive fields. His research in the field of botany caught the attention of public officials and gained him recognition throughout the country, eventually making him one of the most well-known African Americans of his time. In 1921, he was asked to address Congress and give testimony in support of tariffs against imported peanuts, which were undercutting American farmers. Blacks were not normally testifying before Congress, and his presence disturbed some of the Southern members of Congress. Nevertheless, the act he spoke in support of did pass into law the following year. Carver was sought for advice far and wide. He was selected as a member of the Royal Society of Arts in England, and the Crown Prince of Sweden came to study with him. His list of official awards and accolades are quite lengthy. Your Black History Chairman, D.J. Hardy, only gave me 10 minutes for the presentation. Not nearly enough time to talk about Dr. Carver's accolades. After having a bad fall at the age of 78 or 79, George Washington Carver died on January 5, 1943. Carver reached impressive heights of excellence in his lifetime, but the fullest extent of his legacy is not known by many. In fact, many people inhabiting this planet would not even be here if not for the inspiration he kindled among those around him. This is where the story takes a turn and why it matters, that is, the dash in one's obituary between your life arrival and your life's departure. Yet it's rooted in this year's Black-themed history, continuing the legacy of Black excellence. Let's rewind the story just a bit. As I mentioned before, George Washington Carver was the first African-American student at Iowa State. He was clearly a standout student upon arrival, and his passion for learning was recognized by the faculty. Carter not only studied hard in class, but he often ventured out into the woods to observe and study the plant life in the surrounding area. One member of the faculty was so impressed by Carter that he allowed his 6-year-old son, Henry Wallace, to accompany Carver on these field trips. Henry became a de facto student of Carver, and the two began a friendship that would last for years. Young Henry became a learner himself, but while he did own a farm, he did not become famous as a farmer or botanist. Henry Wallace instead became the Vice President of the United States, the second of 3 vice presidents to serve under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. As it happened in 1940, Henry Wallace made an official visit to Mexico to attend the inauguration of the newly elected Mexican president, Manuel Avila Camacho. While on this visit, Wallace witnessed the poverty and hunger in the country and toured farmlands that surrounded the country's capital. Wallace had a strong appreciation for the value of plants dating back to the days when he was a student on field trips under George Washington Carver. After discussions with the agricultural officials of Camacho's administration, he came back to the United States with a desire to create a joint research station between the U.S. government and Mexico. Wallace lobbied the Rockefeller Foundation, which had abandoned a similar project in Europe and Asia because of the outbreak of World War II. Eventually, the joint project between the Rockefeller Foundation and the Mexican Ministry of Agriculture was launched in 1943. A man by the name of Norman Borlaug was hired to head the program. Only a few months after the death of George Washington Carver, his protege, Vice President Henry Wallace, had managed to start the wheels of a program that would change the world. It marked the beginning of what would later be called the Green Revolution. Borlaug focused on the hybridization of corn, wheat, to be grown in more arid climates than what was previously feasible. Through the process of cross-pollination and selective breeding, new strains of the crops were successfully created and distributed to various regions of Mexico where food sufficiency was poor. The crops could not only survive in hotter climates, but he could also create shorter wheat stalks and plants that were more durable against diseases. After finding success in Mexico, Borlaug would later take his experience to the other side of the world to South Asia. The Green Revolution continued as Borlaug began planting hybridized crops in India and Pakistan in 1965. The two countries were actually at war at the time, and Borlaug workers were often planting seeds under the intermittent light flashes of artillery bombardments. Despite the difficulties, Burlog's crops immediately created a higher yield than any crops ever planted before in the Indian subcontinent. Pakistan became self-sufficient in wheat production by 1968, and India became self-sufficient in all cereal production by 1974. In 1984, Burlog came out of semi-retirement to bring his expertise to food production in Africa. By 1995, Ethiopia had recorded the highest agricultural crop yields in history, with a 32% increase in production and a 15% increase average yield over the previous season. To date, Norman Burlog's work is credited with saving the lives of more than 2 billion people, that's with a B, on Earth. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. But Norman Burlog would not have had the opportunity to do what he did if Vice President Henry Wallace had not been so convincing in his appeal to the Rockefeller Foundation. Henry Wallace would not have seen the potential in Mexico's farmlands if he did not have a childhood filled with constant influx of appreciation for plant life and what it could do for humanity, which was given to him by a man who was born into slavery sometime in the 1860s. George Washington Carver had a vision and a passion for learning that was infectious, and his appreciation for the values of plant started inquisitive wheels turning with the snowball effects that spread across the world. Norman Burlog passed away on September 12, 2009, in his final home, right here in Dallas, Texas. In closing, after having shared the excellence of good deeds for the likes of Moses Carver, Mariah Watkins, George Washington Carver, Henry Wallace, Norman Burlog, and Manuel Avila Camacho, I strongly encourage you young scholars to look through the eyes of excellence of these individuals and think about your own legacy and gift of service to our great country, the USA.